Hey everybody, welcome back to the Digital Imaging channel. I'm Will, and today we're going to be talking about the cost of microfilm scanning. Now, a question we often get from people contacting us is, how much will microfilm scanning cost? And we know that this sounds like it's usually a taboo subject, but we want you to know some generalities about what goes into pricing your microfilm scanning project. This will be a 3-part series where in each part we're going to talk about 3 factors that go into all 9 factors of microfilm scanning costs. And in this episode we're going to be talking about the number of microfilm rolls, the type of microfilm, and resolution. So those will be the first 3 factors we talk about. Now, before jumping into the video, this is a very detailed topic, the cost of microfilm scanning. That's why we already had to break it up into 3 parts. But each factor that we're going to talk about, we're keeping it kind of high level. If you want to read more detail and get into the weeds of it, take a look at our blog that we're linking to in our description. You can look at a lot more detail in that article. And lastly, if you want more content like this, talking about microfilm scanning, digital conversion, microfiche scanning, paper scanning, things like that, make sure you subscribe to our channel to keep getting videos like this. The first thing we're going to touch on before the actual 3 factors of the cost of film scanning is just a general microfilm scanning cost. Because you probably want to know, just give me a ballpark, I have some microfilm, how much is it going to cost me? So in general, the range we give folks is usually between $20 and $40 per roll. So theoretically, if you have, say, 1,000 rolls, you could be looking at somewhere between $20,000 for your project and $40,000. Again, ballparks, a lot of other factors come into play, which we're about to talk about, but that's a high-level estimate for you, so you have at least a solid starting point for your project. Factor number 1 when it comes to microfilm scanning costs is the number of rolls that you have in your project. Now, what I have here is a microfilm roll. So this will be considered 1 roll, 1 unit, and depending on how many of those you have, that is one of the biggest factors that's going to determine your overall price. So we gave you that range, we'll just keep that in mind, that $20 to $40 range. If you have, let's say, 1,000 rolls or so, you're going to be getting closer to the lower end of the range because you have a lot more individual units, a lot more rolls. If you have something like 150 rolls, you're going to be pushing closer to that $40 area. So it's a major factor having an idea of how many rolls you have and how many need to scan, because the more rolls you have, generally your per roll cost will go down. Factor number 2 when it comes to cost is type of microfilm, and by type we include a couple sub-factors such as size, length, image layout, reduction ratio, blips, a lot of little nuances, but what we're really going to focus on are just a couple of those, so let's dive into those right now. When we say size of microfilm, we're specifically referring to either 16 or 35 millimeter. 16 millimeter is the first type. It's, I believe, the more common type that we see most often. And here's an example roll, and it's about 3/4 of an inch wide. So I'm not sure how cleanly you can see that, but it's just about 3/4 of an inch wide. And what's usually on these types of rolls are things like office-style documents, maybe student records or medical records or insurance documents, things like that. The other type of microfilm related to size is 35 millimeter. Here we have a 35 millimeter roll, and this one's a bit wider. It's about 1.5 inches wide. You can tell that's much wider than the 16 millimeter, and very quickly, if I can juggle these, you hold them up, 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter, very distinct. And what's going to be on the 35 millimeter film is generally oversized documents such as newspapers, engineering drawings, things of that sort. We will need to know if you have 16 or 35 millimeter because the number of images on each roll is different, and also the types of records and then some other things that tie into that will be dependent on which type of microfilm. Length is the next sub-factor within the microfilm type section. And when we say length, we're talking about either a 100-foot or 215-foot microfilm. So 35 millimeter film is easy. This will always be 100-foot. So we can leave that at, if it's 35 millimeter, we know it's 100 feet. For 16 millimeter film, there can be a difference, and they can be either in the 100-foot length or the 215-foot length. And the 100-foot is called thick film because it actually is thicker. If you put a 100-foot film next to 200-foot, you can actually feel the difference. We have an entire video on this. You should go check it out. But the reason we want to know if it's 100 or 250 feet is because if you have the longer type, you're going to have more images on that roll of film. It's going to take longer to scan, and there will be more images to process once they're digitized. So because of that, that can be a factor in your price. Next, within type of microfilm, the next subcategory is the image layout. Now with 35 millimeter, we said they're usually larger documents such as newspapers or engineering drawings. However, occasionally you can have 16 millimeter images that were captured on the 35 millimeter film. The reason that is important is because if you do have smaller images filmed on the 35 millimeter style, then you may have to actually individually crop those out and parse them out later for your digital files. That could affect it. So the image layout is important even on the 35 millimeter. Most often though, you're going to see differences in image layout on the 16 millimeter film because there are these things called simplex and duplex. Simplex basically means there's one image per frame. So I'm holding out this roll here, you see that there's one image, and then another image, then another image. If this was duplex film, you'd actually have two images, usually on top of each other, per frame. So it'd be two images, two images, two images, two images. So you can see that even on a 100-foot or 215-foot film, duplex doubles the amount of images that we'll have to process, capture, and then provide you in a digital format. So because of that, it is important that we know if you have simplex or duplex film. The last sub-factor within the type of film category that we're going to talk about is blips. And blips are little, call them notches, little blocks below images on the microfilm. So if I had a roll of film and I'm holding it out, you'd have the image, so image, 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 and below that would be something that literally looks like this, just sitting right under the film. So if you have those, we would want to know if they're on your film because that can actually be used for indexing purposes later in the project. We're going to talk about indexing in a later video, but blips will come up there, so it's good to know what they are. Basically, again, you have an image, you have a little thing, we call them blips, right below it that indicates document. So if you have blips, we need to know that too. The third factor that goes into microfilm scanning cost is resolution. Now resolution means the pixels per inch on your image. It's also known as DPI or dots per inch because that originally came from photography. So dots per inch isn't technically the right term when you talk about digital images, but it is the absolute common way of describing what we're talking about here with anyone in the industry. So you're always going to hear, oh, this is going to be 300 DPI, 400 DPI, etc. So we're going to use that in this video as well. So dots per inch is basically in an inch on your image, how many dots or pixels are in there. So the more pixels you have within that inch, the clearer it will be as you zoom in. And if you have fewer dots per inch, it'll be more blocky as you zoom in because each pixel is kind of spread out further. So it's just how clear do you want the image when you zoom in. You're far away, most images look the same. When you zoom in, that's when you start seeing pixelation and it kind of gets a little blurry. Now, 300 DPI is the standard for microfilm scanning, paper scanning, microfiche scanning. Basically, all the services we provide, 300 DPI we use on over 99% of projects. It's very rare that we get a request to go higher or lower than 300 DPI. Now, the reason it can be a price factor is because if you do request a higher DPI, that actually does affect the scanning process. It's not just a flip of a switch, I have a higher DPI. It takes longer to scan the records, it takes longer to process them, they're larger files now because there are more pixels. A couple different things will change if you request a higher DPI, so it can affect your price if you ask for something other than 300 DPI, or at least something higher. Today we covered the first three factors of the cost of microfilm scanning. Number one was the quantity or number of rolls, number two was the type of microfilm, and number three is the resolution of the scans you receive. Make sure to check out parts 2 and 3 of this series so you can see the other 6 factors that relate to microfilm scanning costs. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so you can continue to keep getting content like this and learn more about digital imaging. I'm Will, thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.